Hey friends, around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I had always loved the mountains, especially the ones far away from any kind of city or road. There's something about the quiet, the isolation, and the way nature feels untouched that draws me in. So when my two college friends and I decided to take a camping trip somewhere off the beaten path, it made perfect sense to head way out into Trinity County, far up in Northern California. It's a rugged area, mostly forested, with big hills and streams running down them, and it's also a place where a lot of illegal weed grows. That fact made the whole trip feel a bit more dangerous, but also more real. We left late in the morning, packed tight in my old Jeep, loaded with everything we needed: tents, food, cooking gear, and plenty of beer. The road we took was mostly Route 299, which itself is pretty isolated for long stretches, but we didn't stop there. We took a long dirt road that branched off, twisting and turning through thick forest for miles. There were no signs, no other cars, no people. Just trees, sky, and dirt. The spot we picked was a small clearing beside a shallow stream, the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you knew exactly where to look. It was peaceful and perfect, tall pines surrounding us, the water quietly moving over rocks, and just enough space to set up 2 tents. We figured no one would bother us here. After we unloaded everything and pitched our tents, 2-person tent for me and one friend, and a smaller single tent for the other, we gathered some wood and made a campfire right by the edge of the clearing, close enough to the tents but not too close. We sat around it as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, drinking beer and talking about everything and nothing. It was one of those nights where the air felt crisp but not cold, and the sky was clear, filled with stars. Then, just when we were starting to relax fully, something broke the calm. Out of the brush, right on the edge of the firelight, a large animal burst forward. The sound of it crashing through the underbrush was loud and sudden, like it had been charging through thick branches, snapping twigs and breaking brush. We all jumped, our eyes wide, hands reaching for whatever we had nearby. The animal stopped just outside the fire circle, standing completely still for a moment. But then, the weirdest thing happened. It vanished without a sound. No footsteps, no branches breaking on its way back, nothing. We pointed our flashlights into the bushes where it had come from, but there was no sign. It was like it had simply disappeared. We all agreed it was strange, especially how loudly it had come in, but how silent it was leaving. My friend who grew up around here said it was probably a puma. Those cats can be deadly silent, and he said it wasn't unusual to run into one around here. That was unsettling but also a little reassuring. We weren't dealing with some unknown creature, just a wild cat, hunting or passing through. We laughed it off and drank a little more. I remember the fire flickering against the trees, casting shadows that made the whole place feel alive. Eventually, the fire died down and we crawled into our tents. I shared the 2-person tent with one friend, while the other settled into the single one right beside us. We all felt tired, and after a few minutes we were out cold. Hours later, deep into the night, I woke suddenly, the kind of waking where your body is frozen, but your mind is wide awake, and you're completely alert. I heard something, footsteps, not far away, right outside the tents. The steps were slow and steady, deliberate, almost walking carefully on the dry leaves and dirt. My heart started pounding. At that moment, I had a strong feeling not to call out. My first instinct was to stay silent, even though it would have made sense to yell out to my friend, who might have been outside taking a piss. But something in me told me not to. The footsteps kept moving around the tents. Then a voice came, a man's voice, soft but calm. "Hello? Hello?" The voice repeated over and over, measured and even, not angry or frantic, just strange and unsettling. It wasn't my friend. I could tell by the tone, by the way he was moving. I gripped the small knife I kept in the tent with me and stayed frozen, heart racing. I could hear the steps circling us, sometimes close enough to brush the tent, then moving away again. The quiet of the forest felt thick and heavy, the fire long dead, the stars still overhead but somehow distant. Minutes passed. The man kept calling softly, his voice echoing in the empty woods. Then, without any sound of a vehicle or footsteps retreating, he simply vanished. No sound, no trace, just gone. I lay back down, trying not to breathe too hard, my hands still clutching the knife. My friend slept through the entire thing. I don't know how. When dawn came, pale and gray between the trees, I finally moved and woke my other tent mate. I asked if he had heard the footsteps, the voice, the whole thing. He had. He had the same uneasy feeling. Our third friend, the local, was confused and annoyed that we hadn't just woken him up to deal with it. He said that if it were him, he would have been outside with a bat or a gun. But we both explained why we hadn't. The man's calm, almost quiet voice, the way he moved like he wasn't there, and the gut feeling that something was wrong. It all kept us silent. The local friend admitted it was weird and had a strange vibe, even though he was used to the woods and used to dealing with people. We packed up that morning with heavy hearts. The whole trip had changed for me. It wasn't the wild animals or the isolation that scared me. It was that quiet, calm man walking outside our tents in the middle of the night, alone and unafraid. It made me realize how dangerous the woods could be, not because of nature, but because of people. We never saw that man again, and I never found out what he wanted or why he came. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had called out or jumped up and confronted him. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but that night, staying silent probably saved us. Two years ago, I was tree planting out of a bush camp deep in Saskatchewan. It was the second last night of our planting season, and everything had started to feel looser, more relaxed. After weeks of waking up early, working long shifts in the heat and bugs, and coming back to the same mess tents and portable toilets, the idea of going home soon had changed the air in camp. People were staying up later, drinking more, talking louder, laughing longer. I was one of them. That night, a few of us had stayed up way past what was normal during the regular planting schedule. The rest of the crew had turned in after a long evening of drinking around the fire, their laughter slowly disappearing into the tents. I stuck around after they'd gone, sitting alone by the fire, watching the last few flames flicker as the logs collapsed into glowing coals. There was something about the silence after a long, loud night that I found peaceful. The quiet of the forest pressing in on the edge of the light made the warmth of the fire feel like a fragile little world. At some point, I decided I wanted another beer before I put the fire out for the night. I got up, stretched out my sore back, and walked slowly toward my tent, which was set up a bit farther from the main cluster. The camp layout was familiar to me by then. Mess tent near the center, a couple of pickup trucks lined up just past it, gear scattered around, and tents all around the perimeter. My tent was closer to the tree line than most. I always liked a little distance from the snorers and sleep talkers. I unzipped the tent, ducked in, reached into my cooler bag and grabbed a beer. As I turned to step back outside, I caught something moving fast through the center of camp, just beyond the fire pit. At first, I thought it might be one of the dogs. Some of the crew had dogs that roamed around camp and sometimes chased each other through the open spaces. But I've been around dogs my whole life, and what I saw didn't move like a dog. It was bigger, heavier, and lower to the ground. There was something off about the way it ran, silent but heavy, like it wasn't afraid of anything. I ducked back inside my tent instinctively, heart suddenly pounding. I reached for my flashlight, yanked it from my sleeping bag pocket, and stepped cautiously back toward the tent flap. As I stood up and started to unzip it again, I stopped cold. Right in front of me, no more than 5 feet away, was a black bear. He was staring right at me. In that first moment, my brain barely registered what I was seeing. Just a shape, massive and dark, blending into the shadows. His eyes caught the faint orange glow from the fire behind me and reflected it back with a kind of cold focus. I froze. My hand was still halfway on the zipper of the tent, and I held my breath without even realizing I was doing it. He didn't make a sound, didn't huff, didn't move, just stared. My first thought was that I needed to get away from the tent. My cooler bag was still inside, and the bear clearly knew where the food was. I moved slowly, backing up, keeping the flashlight pointed down toward the ground to avoid flashing it right in his eyes. I stepped away, walking backwards toward the fire pit, the heat from the coals just barely registering in the background of my awareness. Once I was back at the fire, I stood there, gripping the flashlight, trying to figure out what to do next. The bear hadn't followed me. He'd just stood there. Eventually, I heard rustling from the area near our garbage box. We kept it a little ways off to reduce the smell in camp. The box itself was just a large wooden structure with a hinged lid, meant to keep out scavengers. It wasn't exactly bear-proof, but it was the best we had. I watched the tree line for movement, waited for the sounds to tell me what the bear was doing. Every crack of a branch or shifting of leaves made my skin crawl. I didn't want to wake anyone. Most people had been drinking heavily and trying to get a dozen drunk, exhausted planters to handle a bear in the middle of the night would have been a disaster. After a few minutes, the noise near the garbage got louder, sniffing, the sound of claws on wood. The bear was definitely trying to get inside. I waited a little longer. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but at some point, I walked toward the garbage box. I didn't take the flashlight with me. I left it on the crate by the fire. I don't even know why I did that. Maybe I thought the light would scare the bear and make him run into the woods. Maybe I thought I didn't want to startle him if I was already close. I walked slowly, carefully, listening to the gravel and dirt crunch under my boots. It was nearly pitch black away from the fire. Just that deep forest kind of dark where everything looks like shadows moving in other shadows. As I got closer, I couldn't hear the bear anymore. No movement, no sound. I got right up next to the box and still didn't see him. I leaned forward, trying to adjust the garbage lid, which was half off its hinges. As I reached out to lift it, I felt something shift next to me. Not heard, felt. The air moved, just slightly. Then I saw them, his eyes. They flicked toward me, reflecting light I hadn't even realized was there. I had been standing just inches from him. His back paw was right next to my hand. We both froze. It was one of those moments where everything in your body tenses so hard you feel like your muscles might snap. I didn't even breathe. My hand just stayed there, hovering in the air like it had forgotten how to finish what it started. The bear didn't move either, just turned his head slowly, locked eyes with me, and held the gaze. There was no panic in his face, no fear, just awareness. We were two animals, close enough to touch, both realizing at the same time how dangerous this moment could be. In that short span of frozen time, I felt something I still struggle to describe. It wasn't like those stories you hear about spiritual animal connections or magical understanding. This was different. It was more primal, like we both understood the same rules. Don't move fast, don't get loud, don't act out of panic. I could see something intelligent behind his eyes. He was thinking, judging distance, weight, balance, figuring out whether I was a threat or just another piece of the landscape. I was doing the same. I was trying to calculate whether he'd lunge, whether I could dodge, whether yelling would make things worse. Then I broke the moment. I stepped back and shouted. Not a word, just a loud, sharp sound. Instinct more than thought. The bear flinched, backed up, and then took off into the trees. I stood there for a while after he ran, just trying to get my breath under control. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the sweat cooling on my back. My shirt clung to me, damp and cold. I stayed up for the rest of the night. Every 20 or 30 minutes, the bear came back. I could hear him crunching around at the edge of the trees, then getting closer. Each time, I grabbed something loud, metal pans, a stick, once even just stomped around the gravel, and scared him off. He never came into full view again, but I knew it was the same bear. He wasn't ready to give up on the garbage just yet. At one point, I walked around the perimeter of the camp with my flashlight, checking the tents, looking for anything the bear might be drawn to. Found a couple of protein bar wrappers near someone's boots, some half-eaten trail mix in another spot. Picked it all up, tucked it in the bear box near the truck. I didn't want the bear to get too comfortable walking into our space. Once they lose fear of humans, that's when bad things happen, to them and to us. By the time the sky started to lighten and that gray-blue morning haze crept across the horizon, I was exhausted. I'd been on edge for hours. My nerves stretched thin. My legs ached from standing. My head throbbed from the few drinks I'd had, and the adrenaline had left me completely drained. I went into my tent, lay down on my sleeping bag, and stared up at the nylon ceiling. I could still see his eyes when I closed mine. I slept for about 2 hours before someone's alarm went off. It was the last day of planting. Everyone was hungover and moving slow, grumbling about sore muscles and heavy heads. I didn't say much to anyone that morning, just grabbed my gear, ate some oatmeal, and packed my shovel. I didn't tell most of the crew about what had happened until much later, partly because I didn't want to deal with everyone making a joke of it, but mostly because it felt personal. That moment I shared with the bear, those few seconds when we were both frozen in place, it changed something in me. It made me respect the forest in a way I hadn't before. It reminded me that no matter how many tents, trucks, and cook stoves we bring out there, it's not really ours. We're visitors, temporary ones. That was 2 years ago. I haven't been back to that exact camp since, but I still think about it often, especially when I'm alone in the woods, when everything gets quiet, and the line between being safe and being part of the food chain feels thinner than usual. I never forgot the weight of that stare, the way the forest pressed in around us, the sound of his breath. I don't think I ever will. When I was about 12 or 13, one summer night felt just perfect for camping. It wasn't anything wild or adventurous like going out into the mountains or a national park or even far from home. It was just my backyard. But my backyard wasn't your usual trimmed lawn surrounded by a wooden fence. Ours was different. The house sat at the end of a quiet road, backed by what felt like endless woods. I never measured it exactly, but those trees started maybe 50 feet from the back porch and stretched way back into the hills. Pine, oak, and maple, packed tightly together, thick brush and undergrowth at the base. During the day, it looked peaceful, kind of beautiful even. At night, whole different story. I had a cheap 2-person dome tent that my parents got me for my birthday the year before. It was basic, blue and gray, with a rainfly that was kind of a pain to attach, and mesh sides that made it breathable but also kind of cold at night. I had set it up earlier that day, right at the edge of the yard, just where the trimmed grass gave way to uneven, leaf-littered dirt and a mix of twigs, pine needles, and old fallen branches. I staked it down hard and double-checked everything like I was prepping for a real wilderness trip, even though the house was right there behind us. My friend, Evan, had come over with his sleeping bag and a small backpack full of junk food. He was a little older than me, maybe by 6 months or so, and had that kind of outdoorsy confidence that came from his dad taking him hunting once. Just once. But still, he talked about it like he'd survived weeks in the Alaskan tundra. He always wore this old camo hat, too big for his head, and he had a pocket knife clipped to his jeans that he never used for anything more dangerous than carving his name into tree bark. We set up our sleeping bags side by side, unrolled snacks, and lay there, talking in low voices. I remember there was that late summer heat still lingering in the air, thick and sticky, and the occasional mosquito whining near my ears. I sprayed myself down and then zipped the tent shut tight. We had a flashlight between us that we were using more for making shadows on the wall than anything else. Every once in a while, the beam would catch a moth fluttering outside the mesh or a bigger bug thumping into the side of the tent. I don't know how long we were out there before things got weird. It was late enough that everything had gone quiet, which in its own way is creepy. People think woods are loud at night, crickets, frogs, owls, but sometimes they just go dead silent. And that's when you start to notice how close the darkness feels. We were still whispering about random stuff, school, a girl he liked, a video game we were both playing, when we heard it. Not a twig snap or some rustle off in the distance. Not something vague and explainable. It was loud, sudden, and it was right up against the wall of the tent. It started with a single heavy thump, like something hitting the ground hard just inches from where my head was. Then came the snarling. I've tried to describe that sound a million times since. It wasn't like a dog growling, though that's the closest thing I can compare it to. But it was deeper, almost wet sounding, like it came from the back of something's throat, full of spit and anger and strength. It went on for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, long enough to feel like it lasted forever. Then, as fast as it had come, it stopped. We were frozen. I don't think either of us moved at all during those few seconds. I just stared at the tent ceiling. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. I could feel every inch of my skin, every drop of sweat. My breathing was shallow and loud in my ears. I remember thinking if I could hear myself this clearly, then whatever was out there could hear me even better. Evan whispered something, too low for me to make out, but I could hear the fear in it. He wasn't trying to sound tough now. There was no confident hunter voice, no jokes, just panic. And somehow that scared me even more. If he was scared, I knew it had to be bad. We lay there for what felt like 10 minutes, not daring to move or breathe too loud. My brain was working in overdrive, cycling through everything it could possibly be. A dog? Maybe. But I knew the neighbors' dogs, and this didn't sound like any of them. A bear? There were rumors that one had been seen a few miles away the year before, rummaging through trash cans near the river. Maybe it wandered here, or maybe it was a buck like Evan later guessed. A pissed-off deer that wandered too close and didn't like the smell of Doritos and cheap bug spray. Evan started whispering about antlers, about how bucks get really aggressive during rutting season, how they'll charge anything. I had no idea if any of it was true, but the image of sharp, bone antlers suddenly piercing the thin nylon of our tent was enough to make me want to throw up. Then he said maybe it was a bear. Big, black, silent, hungry. I imagined massive claws and teeth tearing into the tent like tissue paper. We didn't have weapons. Not even a real flashlight, just a small plastic one that barely lit up more than a few feet. No phones.
No walkie-talkies.
Nothing but a zipped-up piece of fabric between us and whatever that thing had been. My house was 50 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Running meant opening the tent, standing up, turning our backs on the woods, and sprinting into the open. I didn't even know if I could make my legs work. We started planning. If one of us peeked outside and didn't see anything, we'd make a run for it. I was the one who volunteered to look, mostly because I didn't want Evan to do it and say I was a coward for the rest of my life. My hand was shaking as I reached for the zipper, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every sound felt amplified, like the world was holding its breath. I unzipped it just enough to peek out. At first, all I saw was the backyard, empty, quiet, still. I pushed my head out further, turning left, then right, scanning for movement. Nothing. No shadow, no sound, no sign of anything at all. I couldn't even hear the usual bugs and frogs. It was just silent. I whispered to Evan that it looked clear, and he bolted out of the tent before I even finished the sentence. I followed right behind him, adrenaline kicking in hard. We didn't close the tent. We didn't grab our sleeping bags or flashlight or snacks. We just ran full speed across the yard, grass wet under our socks, arms pumping, breathing ragged. We burst through the back door, panting, faces flushed and wide-eyed. My parents were sitting in the living room watching a movie, some old lady being driven around in a car by a black guy. I didn't really register it until later. We tried to explain what happened, tripping over our words, trying to describe the snarling sound and how it was right up against the tent. We said maybe a deer, or a bear, or a monster, something huge, something angry. My dad turned the volume down and leaned back in his chair, looking at us like we just told him aliens landed in the driveway. Then he asked what it sounded like. We both kind of looked at each other, unsure. Evan said kind of like a deer, but scarier. I said maybe a bear. But the sound, it was more like something growling, really deep and echoing. That's when my dad asked if it sounded like someone growling down a long PVC pipe. And suddenly it clicked. All the fear, the panic, the racing hearts. It all snapped into place. It was him. Years later, I found out exactly how he'd done it. He had this long piece of plastic tubing in the garage, one of those thick ones used for draining something. I never paid attention to what. He'd snuck out while we were in the tent and crawled around the side in the dark, staying just out of sight, then growled into the pipe right up against the fabric wall. The pipe made it sound massive, deep, like it came from something with a chest the size of a refrigerator. Then he'd slipped back around and came in through the front door like nothing had happened. He thought it was funny. He laughed about it for years. Even my mom cracked a smile when he told the story later. Evan and I didn't think it was funny at the time, not at all. For hours afterward, we were still twitchy, jumping at creaks and thuds and swearing we'd never sleep outside again. The next day, in the daylight, we went back out to the tent. There were no claw marks, no hoof prints, no disturbed brush, nothing, just our sleeping bags, slightly crumpled. The flashlight was still on, batteries dying. The air smelled like pine and grass. It was just a backyard again. But that night never left me. Not because I really believed there was something in the woods, but because of how real the fear felt, how quickly it grabbed hold of me and didn't let go. 50 feet from the safety of my own house, I had never felt so far from help. We joke about it now. I tell the story sometimes and people laugh. But deep down, there's a part of me that remembers the way my chest tightened, how I couldn't move, how I imagined teeth and claws and dark eyes right on the other side of the tent wall. Even though I know it was my dad, even though I know there was never anything really there, I still think about how easily fear can come, how quickly the familiar becomes terrifying. All it takes is one sound in the dark, and suddenly, even your own backyard feels like the middle of nowhere. Back in the early 90s, I was about 8 years old, and I was a part of a local Girl Scout troop in Kentucky. I still remember the exact weekend this happened because it was supposed to be our big end-of-summer camping trip. We'd been preparing for it for weeks, packing gear, learning how to cook over portable stoves, and practicing tying knots and reading maps. Our troop leaders said it was supposed to build our confidence. They wanted us to feel like we could take care of ourselves out there. Looking back now, I'm not sure they expected just how much we'd need to rely on all of that. The campground was part of a larger state park, several hundred acres of forested hills, shallow creeks, and a man-made lake. I can't remember the name of the park anymore, but it was remote enough that when you were out there, you felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. We had a good dozen girls in our troop, ages 7 to 9, plus 3 adult leaders, and we were assigned a campsite close to the river, maybe half a mile from the main access road. Just uphill from us was a Boy Scout troop. They had a few tents set up in a large circle and were older, mostly teenagers, maybe 12 to 16. We'd waved at them earlier, and a couple of the older girls in our group had snuck glances and giggled, but that was the extent of the interaction. At that age, we were still pretty separate in terms of what we did. The weekend started off normal. Warm weather, clear skies. We had a flag ceremony, worked on our fire building badges, with the fire pit sealed and real fires banned due to how dry it had been, and hiked along the river. The first night was peaceful. We slept in sleeping bags inside green canvas tents, the kind that always smelled faintly of mildew no matter how often they were aired out. I remember lying there and listening to the frogs and crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Nothing felt out of place. The second day was when the weather shifted. It had been hot all afternoon, with a heavy, pressing kind of heat that made everything feel slow. The kind of heat that made sweat stick to your clothes. Then, around dinner, the wind picked up. Fast-moving clouds started rolling in from the west. I remember one of the troop leaders scanning the sky with a look I'd never seen on her before. Worried, unsure. She told us to clean up quickly, and we ate granola bars and fruit for dinner instead of cooking anything. That's when we started hearing rumors that there were storms moving into the area. But back then, we didn't have cell phones. The leaders had weather radios, but they only gave limited information. A severe thunderstorm watch, some talk of flash floods in low-lying areas. But no one came to evacuate us, and so we stayed. Later that evening, while we were settling down, we saw a ranger vehicle up at the access road. Lights flashing, someone yelling to the Boy Scouts. It was dark by then, and the rain had started, just a light patter. The Boy Scout leaders were talking to the ranger for several minutes, then started rushing around, clearly telling their kids to start packing things up. We watched, confused, but no one came down to our site. Our leaders looked anxious but didn't panic. They told us to go ahead and get to bed. "We'll keep an eye on the storm," I remember one of them saying. So we went to sleep. I woke up to my tent collapsing on me. That's not an exaggeration. One of the poles had snapped, and the canvas, now heavy with water, caved in right onto me and the other two girls in my tent. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I was disoriented. It was dark, and the sound of the rain pounding was deafening. Then I realized that the floor beneath us felt strange, cold and soft and moving. Water. It was water. We scrambled out, crying, crawling through the collapsed tent. When I stood up, I realized the water was already above my ankles. It was moving fast. Not a still puddle, but a rushing current of runoff coming down from the higher parts of the park. The tents were barely holding up. Some were already leaning. Others were completely flattened. I could see flashlights flickering through the downpour. One of the troop leaders grabbed my arm and told me to stay close, though I barely heard her over the storm. The Boy Scouts were there. They'd come down to our camp and were helping pull girls from collapsed tents. A couple of them were already waist-deep in the water, hoisting sleeping bags and backpacks onto the drier parts of the site. The scout leaders, both ours and theirs, were yelling directions and trying to keep order, but it was chaos. The wind kept pushing us sideways, and the water was rising by the minute. Some of the older girls were trying to carry the little ones. The leaders had already decided it was too dangerous to drive out. The access road, which wasn't even paved, just a packed dirt road that twisted through the trees, had disappeared under several inches of muddy water. No one could tell if any parts of it had washed out completely. We couldn't risk it. That left one option: hike out. That's when someone brought up the treehouse cabins. They were listed on the park map. A small cluster of raised shelters used for more advanced camps and outdoor retreats. No electricity, no amenities, but they were high up, 15 feet off the ground, maybe more, and far enough from the river that they might still be safe. The problem was they were several miles away. We didn't have a choice. We packed what we could. A couple of tarps, some soaked sleeping bags, a flashlight or two. Our troop leaders and the Boy Scout leaders studied the map by flashlight. We were told we had to move quickly. The water was still rising, and if we stayed much longer, there'd be no way out at all. The hike was miserable. It was the middle of the night, and the storm was only getting worse. The rain came sideways. The trees groaned in the wind. At times, it felt like branches might break and fall on us. The ground was soaked and slick, and mud sucked at our boots with every step. Several times, we had to wade through parts of the trail that were already knee-deep in water. The older boys carried the younger girls when they started stumbling. One boy picked me up when I couldn't keep my balance, wrapping his arms tight around my soaked poncho as we trudged forward. I couldn't stop shivering. My clothes were soaked through, and even though it was summer, the cold rain felt like ice. We huddled in groups, arms around each other, trying to keep moving, keep warm, keep going. At one point, we had to cross a shallow creek that had turned into a rushing stream. A few of the leaders tested it with sticks before helping each person across. It was terrifying. Every few steps, I thought my foot would slip and I'd get swept away. The current was stronger than I'd ever felt. But we kept going. It took us hours to get to those cabins. I think we reached them just before dawn, but time had stopped making sense long before then. The tree houses were just platforms with railings and roofs built around the trunks of large trees. No walls, no insulation, but they were above the flood line, and that was all that mattered. The adults helped us up the ladders one by one. Once we were all inside, they broke into the emergency supply boxes stored inside each unit. Most were empty, but one had a stack of metallic space blankets, which they wrapped around us. They handed out dry socks and gloves where they could. No firewood, though. There hadn't been any collected up there for months because of fire bans, and none of us had any dry matches left anyway. We all huddled in the middle of the cabin floor, sitting on tarps and trying to warm up. The Boy Scouts made a circle around us, using their bodies to block the wind as best they could. It helped, but not much. We were still soaked to the skin and freezing. Hours passed like that. I remember my teeth chattering so badly it hurt. I remember hugging my knees, sitting pressed between two other girls, all of us silent. One of the older boys eventually broke the silence by asking if we knew any songs, and somehow that kicked off a round of Girl Scout songs. Goofy camp songs, nature songs, old ones we barely remembered. It didn't make us warm, but it gave us something to do besides sit and shake. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up to a soft gray light and the sound of boots on the stairs. Park ranger had found us. He looked stunned, like he hadn't expected anyone to be up there. He asked no questions, just looked us over, then rushed off again, promising help was on the way. Help came in the form of trucks and ATVs. They brought warm blankets, food, hot drinks. We were taken to a ranger station on higher ground where emergency workers checked us over. A couple of girls had mild hypothermia. A few of us were dangerously chilled, but none of us had broken bones. None of us were missing. None of us were dead. That hit me later, how easily it could have gone the other way. If the water had come faster, if we'd stayed in our tents, if we'd tried to drive, if those Boy Scouts hadn't been there, I don't know how our troop would have made it out on our own. We were just kids. Most of us couldn't have made that hike without help. The state park shut down after that, at least for a while. When our parents picked us up later that day, most of them didn't even know how bad it had gotten. We were lucky the roads had reopened by the time the sun was fully out. I never went back to that park. I still have the badge we got for that trip. It says, Survivor, Flood 93. I don't wear it, but I keep it in a box with old letters and photos. Some nights, even now, we picked that spot near the lake because it was quiet. Far from any real town, no cell service, no lights, just trees, water, and enough room to set up our tents, light a fire, and drink a few beers without bothering anyone. It was me, my best friend Tyler, and 4 other guys we had known since high school. We had done stuff like this before, driven out into the middle of nowhere, spent a night or 2 away from everything, grilled some food, talked about dumb stuff, maybe tried to fish if we remembered to bring the right gear. That day had been normal. We rolled in late afternoon, parked the trucks under a big cluster of trees near the dirt trail, and got to work setting everything up. There was still some light left when we finished pitching the tents, so we walked down to the lake, skipped a few rocks, and just stood around, staring at the water. It was the kind of still, open quiet you only really notice when you've been around noise too long. We built the fire just after sundown. It was warm for early spring, maybe mid-60s, and the sky was clear. No wind, no bugs. Felt perfect. We grilled burgers, drank cheap beer from a cooler, and sat around the fire talking about life. Some of us had jobs, some didn't. Some had girlfriends, some didn't. It was just one of those nights where the air feels heavy and still, but not in a bad way. We all joked around like we were still kids. I remember looking at my phone once, out of habit. No bars, of course. The time said 1:26 a.m. I tossed it back into my sleeping bag, thinking I'd probably crash soon. My head was buzzing a little from the drinks, but nothing crazy. I wasn't drunk, just relaxed. Tyler was poking at the fire with a stick, and the rest of the guys were either sitting back in fold-out chairs or lying on the big picnic blanket we'd thrown on the ground. It was calm. Then I heard it, rustling in the bushes behind us. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just something small moving through dry leaves or underbrush. I figured it was a rabbit, maybe a raccoon. Could have even been the wind shifting a branch, but there hadn't been a breeze all night. Still, I stood up and turned to look. Nothing moved in the darkness past the firelight, but the sound had been real. I walked over, just a few steps past where the firelight stopped, and squinted. My eyes were slow to adjust, and there was a moon, but it wasn't full. The outline of the trees was thick, and the space between was too dark to make anything out. I stood there for a minute, just listening. Nothing. I turned back, felt stupid, and sat back down. Then came the truck. About 5 minutes later, 1:35 a.m. Maybe I heard it before I saw it. A deep, slow rumble rolling over the dirt trail up behind us. Then the music, some kind of country or rock, turned up loud enough that you could hear the bass shaking the windows. The engine was revving low and steady, like it was crawling along real slow. I turned and stood up again, and the rest of the guys did too, one by one. The truck came into view between the trees. Big lifted body, oversized tires, chrome grille. It looked like something you'd see at a monster truck rally. It was going maybe 5 miles an hour, crawling over the dirt like it was looking for something. Then it stopped. A blinding spotlight, police grade, the kind they mount to cruisers, snapped on and swung across our campsite. It lit up the tents, the fire, the trees, and finally us. I could barely keep my eyes open from the brightness. My chest tightened. No one moved. The light stayed on us for a full 5 seconds, maybe more. Then it clicked off. The truck revved loud, spun its tires in the loose dirt, kicked up a cloud of dust, and peeled off down the road. Gone. None of us said anything. We just looked at each other, trying to figure out if that was supposed to be funny or threatening. Maybe some bored locals messing with out-of-towners. But even that didn't really add up. No one lives out there. And why the spotlight? Why stop and look at us? Tyler and I grabbed the keys to his truck and decided to drive up the road. We weren't being stupid, we just wanted to see if the truck had gone somewhere, or maybe turned around. It felt weird, and we didn't want it coming back. We told the other guys to stay put and keep the fire going. We'd just be a few minutes. We drove slow. The dirt trail curved through the trees for maybe a quarter mile before meeting a narrow paved road that ran east to west. It was a back road, sure, but it connected to a few main highways about 10 miles out. As we got closer, we saw the flashing lights. At first, it looked like a single police cruiser with its lights on. Maybe someone pulled over. Then we saw more blue and red strobes reflecting off the trees and the pavement. Too many to count at first. We rolled up to the edge of the tree line and stopped. There were at least 7 or 8 cop cars parked along both shoulders, lights spinning. A few guys in uniform were moving around quickly. Some crouched near the ditch, some further up the road. 2 ambulances were parked off to the side, their back doors open. I could see people moving inside one of them, and the other had a stretcher halfway out. There were a couple plainclothes guys too. Maybe detectives? No one looked calm. I was about to throw the truck into reverse when something hit the window. I jumped. A flashlight was aimed right at my face through the glass. The cop holding it was maybe mid-40s, big guy, wearing a vest and holding a radio in his other hand. I rolled the window down, heart thumping. He asked what we were doing, and we told him we were camping. I said something about the truck with the spotlight, how it felt weird. He listened, eyes sharp, but didn't look surprised. Then he said something that flipped everything. He told us there had been a homicide. Not an accident, not a robbery gone wrong, a homicide. A 111, 2 miles from where we had camped. They hadn't located the suspect. That hit like a punch in the gut. I didn't say anything. Tyler just stared forward. The cop looked over his shoulder, toward the activity, then back at us. He told us plainly we should camp somewhere else. He wasn't worried, but there were 20 officers there, and they all had guns. That's what he said. Nothing more. We didn't argue. We drove back faster than we had come, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. Back at camp, we didn't waste time. Tyler called the others and told them to pack up. No details, no discussion. Just pack everything and be ready to move. The fire was still burning low when we pulled up, and our friends were scrambling. Tents were being pulled out of the ground with the poles still attached. Coolers thrown in the back of the truck bed. Sleeping bags half-rolled, stuffed into the cab. We didn't care about folding anything. We just wanted out. Took maybe 6 minutes to tear everything down. We didn't look around. We didn't talk. We got into the trucks and left. Later, we found out the truth. The killer had walked through the woods after ditching his car near the road. He had cut cross-country, maybe trying to find a place to hide. Someone spotted the truck we'd seen and called it in. The spotlight had been his. He must have taken the truck after the murders, or maybe it was his own. The scariest part? When we left, the police found him less than half an hour later. Less than 30 minutes after we had torn down camp. They found him at our campsite. He had come back. They didn't say if he was armed, but that didn't matter. He had already killed 3 people. We had been sitting by a fire in a clearing in the dark. No cell service, no help. We were just sitting ducks. I think about that sometimes. What if we had stayed 10 minutes longer? What if we had ignored the cop? What if we'd been asleep when he came back? I don't camp anymore. Not like that. I don't go deep into the woods, And I don't sleep where I can't call for help. I don't trust how quiet it gets at night out there. And I don't trust rustling in the bushes anymore. Not even the small ones. Because sometimes it's not an animal. Sometimes it's a man. And sometimes he's already done something unthinkable. That trip was the last one we all did together. Life got busy after that. Some of us drifted apart. But I still see Tyler now and then. And when we talk about that night, neither of us really says much. Just a look, maybe a shake of the head. Because deep down, we both know the same thing. We weren't just camping that night. We were being watched. And we got out by minutes. Last year, me and a friend decided to do a long road trip across parts of the country we'd never really explored. The plan was loose. Just drive west from our hometown in Virginia and make our way through the south and southwest, stopping to camp most nights to save money. We wanted to see open land, small towns, backwoods highways. No itinerary, no strict schedule. Just the road, the woods, and our own company. On the first day, we'd only made it a few hours in before stopping at a gas station in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. The air was humid and smelled faintly like coal dust. While we were filling up, I grabbed some beef jerky and water and saw a small wire rack near the window with paper pamphlets for local campgrounds. They were printed on cheap glossy paper, clearly not updated recently, but we figured it was as good a guide as any. One stood out, White Rocks Campground in the Jefferson National Forest. The photo showed a rocky outcrop with a wide overlook and what looked like decent forest cover. It was supposed to be peaceful, remote, and up in the mountains. Perfect. We were in my old Subaru wagon, and according to the directions on the pamphlet, the campground was a 25-plus mile drive from the main road, mostly up a dirt and gravel track. It was still early afternoon, and the idea of a quiet, isolated mountain campsite sounded great. We didn't want people or noise, just space. So we followed the map. We turned off onto the dirt road that wound steadily upward, thick trees pressing in on either side. The road was barely wide enough for 2 cars, and as we climbed higher, the woods got denser. We didn't see a single car for the first 20 minutes. Just trees, old power lines, and the occasional faded sign for hunting areas or trail markers. Eventually, we passed a massive coal facility sitting like a skeleton on the side of the mountain. The kind of place you feel in your chest before you even see it. It was half hidden by dust and trees, and the chain-link gate looked long and used, even though the lights inside glowed weakly. On a rusted-out billboard near the road, a faded sign read, 62 days since on-site incident, in red stick-on numbers. A little further up the road, we saw the only people we'd encountered since turning off the highway. 4 of them standing by a plastic storage bin that had flames coming out of it like an improvised burn barrel. All of them were facing inward, close together, like they were warming their hands or cooking something. Their heads turned slightly as we passed, but none of them waved. None smiled. I remember the firelight making their faces flicker in weird ways. No house or trailer was visible nearby, just the woods and the dirt road. They were completely out there alone. We laughed a little nervously, brushing it off as local flavor. But I remember both of us going quiet afterward as we climbed the last miles into the forest. No cell service, no more vehicles, just gravel and dust and pines. We finally reached White Rocks Campground late in the day. The sun was starting to slide down behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the forest floor. We pulled into the wide gravel loop that circled through about 30 campsites, and every single one of them was empty. We did 2 full laps just to make sure. No cars, no tents, no people, no sounds, except the crunch of gravel under our tires and the occasional breeze pushing through the trees. Felt abandoned, not just empty, but left behind. Like no one had camped there in years, even though the place was clearly still maintained in a minimal sense. The picnic tables were worn but unbroken. The grills weren't rusted through. The signs were faded but still legible. We picked a site near the back of the loop, not too close to the outhouse structure, and parked. Felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. I've been in woods all my life. I grew up hiking, backpacking, camping. I don't scare easy when it comes to remote places. But this was different. The air didn't feel right. It was too still. Not peaceful, just motionless. I got out of the car and stood there for a moment, trying to get a read on what was bothering me. The air was thick and quiet. No birds, no insects,
No rustling.
just this thick, muffled silence like the woods were waiting for something. My friend stood next to me, equally still. Neither of us said anything, but we both knew. But it had been a long day. We were stubborn. We figured it was just nerves from being in such a remote place after so many hours on the road. So we set up camp. I took on fire duty and she worked on the tent. Even while we worked, I found myself stopping and listening every few minutes. So did she. We tried to laugh it off by saying that at least we'd hear someone coming because of all the dry leaves around. There were thick layers of them all over the ground. We joked about crunchy leaf security, but deep down we weren't laughing. We finally got the fire going, the tent up, sleeping bags rolled out. We ate some granola bars and jerky and sat by the fire, trying to settle into that quiet outdoor rhythm. But it never came. The woods never opened up. The night just kept closing in tighter around us. The darkness in that forest was thick. It wasn't the usual kind of dark you get when you're far from cities. This felt heavy, like something physical pressing in. Our fire lit maybe a 10-foot circle around us, and everything beyond that was just black. My eyes kept drifting to the edges of that circle, scanning the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every 10 minutes or so, I'd grab my headlamp and do a slow scan of the trees. Nothing, just bark and shadows. But that feeling never left. I wasn't imagining it. I felt spooked before. This wasn't that. This felt targeted. Eventually, we gave up on pretending we were enjoying ourselves and decided to just go to bed and get out of there first thing in the morning. We doused the fire, climbed into the tent, zipped the flap, and got into our sleeping bags. Just before lying down, I remembered the knife still in the glove box of the car. It was the only real weapon we had. I got out, grabbed it, and placed it beside me inside the tent. It wasn't big, just a utility blade, but it felt better than nothing. My friend tried to get a signal on her phone. Nothing. She tried to call her boyfriend anyway. The call just spun and dropped. I muttered something like, "No reception, not gonna work." And then we both went quiet, listening to the phone attempt to connect. That's when we heard it. Footsteps, not far away, maybe 20 feet to the left side of the tent. Crunching, slow, deliberate steps, like someone had just started moving after standing still. The sound didn't build up slowly, it just started. Like whoever it was had already been there. Waiting. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would shake the tent. The steps moved toward us, then circled behind the tent. They weren't rushing. They were steady, heavy. Not like an animal sniffing or rustling. This was weight, boots on dry leaves. Then they stopped, just behind the tent. Dead silence. I didn't breathe. I could see my friend frozen beside me, her eyes wide, reflecting the faint red light from the phone screen. Her hand reached out and grabbed the knife. She sat up, unzipped the tent, stepped outside with the headlamp, and stood there silently, scanning the trees. I stayed inside, clutching the sleeping bag like it could somehow protect me. Her light moved across the trunks and leaves, fast but steady. She didn't say anything. She didn't move far, just stood there, turning slowly. After nearly a minute, she ducked back inside and said exactly what I was already thinking. We packed up in record time. Sleeping bags, tent, trash, cooler, all jammed into the car. Took maybe 10 minutes. The whole time, we only had our headlamps. Our fire was dead, and I kept expecting someone to step out of the trees at any second. I kept imagining a hand grabbing my arm from the dark, but nothing came. We slammed the hatch closed, jumped into the car, and peeled out of the sight. Gravel sprayed, tires slipped, but we didn't stop. And then we saw them. Two black, dirty trucks pulled off the road, maybe 100 yards from the campground entrance. Parked in the trees, not even fully off the road, but angled just enough to hide from casual view. They hadn't been there when we drove in. They were old trucks, mud-splattered, lifted, one with a broken tail light. No lights were on, no movement, but they were there. facing toward the campground. Waiting. We didn't stop. We didn't look long. We just drove. The 25-mile dirt road down that mountain took forever. My eyes never left the rearview mirror. When we got to a paved road again, we didn't even talk about finding another campsite. We just kept driving until we reached a small town with a roadside motel. It was nearly midnight. The clerk must have seen the panic on our faces. He didn't ask much, just gave us a room and let us be. In the morning, we told him everything. He nodded slowly, listened all the way through. Then he handed us a few small bills from his wallet and told us to use it for another motel down the road if we needed it. We took it. I've camped many times since then, but I'll never go back to White Rocks. Not alone, not unarmed. I started working at the summer camp in late May, just before the first groups of kids were scheduled to arrive. The camp was tucked up high in the mountains, far enough from any real town that a trip to the nearest gas station felt like a half-day errand. There were pine trees everywhere. The air always had a bite of coolness to it, even on the warmest afternoons, and the nights came quickly and thick. When it got dark there, it got really dark. No city lights bleeding into the sky, no background hum of traffic, just blackness and the sound of wind or whatever moved out there in the woods. That summer, I had signed on to work the full season, which ran from early June through late August. I wasn't new to camp work. I'd done it before in other places, but this one was different. It was older, rougher around the edges, and honestly just more isolated. We had cabins scattered across the slope of a wooded mountain, a swimming pool built right into a clearing near the center of camp, and a few gravel roads that wound between the mess hall, the health center, the rec fields, and the activity lodges. There were only a handful of working landlines, no cell signal unless you hiked up to this one rocky outcrop half a mile up the mountain. We used radios for communication during the day, but after lights out, you were basically on your own unless you were near the main office. The week things got weird started off as nothing special. It was mid-season and staff burnout was creeping in. We were a little short-staffed at the time. A few people had left early for school obligations or other jobs, and others were out that week on their scheduled breaks. That day, I had drawn the short straw and was one of the few staff left behind while everyone else took a group of campers out on an overnight hike. Only a few younger kids remained behind for medical or behavioral reasons, and they were housed close to the nurse's cabin with 2 counselors assigned to them. Everyone else was gone. The place felt hollow, like a movie set when they stop filming for the day and everyone clears out. I didn't mind the quiet, to be honest. I liked the woods, and solitude never really bothered me. What I hadn't realized, though, was just how eerie the camp would feel when almost everyone was gone. During the day, it was manageable, but as the sun started to go down, that creeping stillness began to settle into my bones. That evening, just after dinner, I made my way toward one of the cabins near the edge of camp to use the landline. It was one of the only places where the phone still worked, and I wanted to check in with a friend before calling it a night. The sky was already fading into that soft, dark blue you get in the last minutes of twilight. I had a flashlight clipped to my belt, but I didn't bother turning it on yet. There was just enough light to see where I was going, and I knew the paths by heart. The call wasn't long, 10 minutes at most. Just catching up, talking about nothing important. After I hung up, I took a moment to look out the cabin window. From there, I could see the pool off to the left and the gravel path that ran down toward the mess hall. The camp had gone quiet as expected. I stood there for a second longer than I meant to, just listening. No voices, no laughter, no splashing from the pool. Just wind in the trees and the soft tick of crickets starting up for the night. I figured I should head back to my cabin before it got truly dark. I stepped outside, turned on my flashlight, and started walking. I took the same path I always took, from the cabin past the pool toward the flagpole that marked the center of camp. As I got closer to the flagpole, something didn't feel right. It wasn't a sound or a smell. It was just a gut thing, like my brain knew something was off before I consciously picked up on it. Then I saw it. A huge black mass, moving slowly but steadily, just past the pool. It was maybe 30 yards ahead of me. I froze. My first thought, not fully formed yet, was that something was wrong with the shadows. But then it moved again, more clearly this time, and the shape came into focus under the beam of my flashlight. It was a bear, a big one, easily over 300 pounds. Solid, dark black fur. The way it moved was slow but certain, like it had done this before and wasn't worried about much. I stopped in my tracks, heart hammering in my chest. My flashlight beam hit it square in the face, and it lifted its head to look at me. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Me, frozen on the path with a flashlight in one hand, probably holding my breath. The bear, standing halfway between the pool and the dumpster, just watching. Its eyes reflected back in the light, and for a moment, it didn't seem angry or scared, just surprised, like I was the last thing it expected to run into. It was surreal. All I could think was, oh crap, a bear. But then something about its posture seemed to say the same thing back to me. Oh crap, a human. It didn't charge, didn't growl, didn't even huff. It just stood there, looking at me. Then, almost as if it had made a decision, it turned sharply to the right, away from the dumpster, and ambled up the slope into the trees. I stayed there for another full minute, not moving, heart still pounding. Once it disappeared into the woods and the rustling faded, I slowly backed up a few steps, turned and walked, carefully but quickly, the long way around back to my cabin. I locked the door, sat on my bunk, and just sat there in the dark for a long time. My flashlight was still in my hand. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside felt bigger than it probably was. I kept picturing the bear walking through camp in the dark, sniffing around, maybe coming back toward my cabin. I knew, logically, that black bears usually avoided people and that this one had clearly wanted nothing to do with me. But that logic didn't do much when I was lying awake in a dark wooden cabin with a thin door and no cell reception. The next morning, I was up early, before breakfast duty, before the sun had fully cleared the treetops. I walked down to the dumpster by the mess hall. Sure enough, it had been tipped. Not broken into, the bare bars held, but knocked on its side, dirt and drag marks all around it. I followed the tracks for a bit. They led off into the woods, uphill in the direction the bear had taken the night before. The staff who came back from the overnight hike later that day helped me right the dumpster. The story got around quickly. At first, it was just something to laugh about. The bear sighting, how I'd been alone and hadn't panicked. But by the time the next round of campers arrived, the story had grown a bit. I didn't encourage it, but I didn't correct it either. According to the campers, I had stared down a bear and scared it off with my presence alone. One of the kids started calling me the bear lady, and it stuck. By the end of the week, even the younger staff were using it. What was strange, though, was what happened next. The bear kept coming back. Not every night, but often enough that we started checking the dumpster each morning as part of our routine. It never got into it. Those bars really did their job, but it always tried. Always tipped it over, always sniffed around. But here's the weird part. It never went back the same way twice. We started noticing that it avoided certain areas of camp. More specifically, it avoided wherever I had spent the night. When I switched cabins to help cover for another staffer on the far side of camp, the bear's tracks stopped going near that area entirely. When I returned to my original cabin, it altered its route again. Someone joked that I had established dominance. I laughed, but deep down, something about it made sense. Animals remember, especially bears, that moment of stillness between us, when neither of us moved and it decided to turn away, must have set something off in its instincts. I wasn't prey. I wasn't food. I wasn't a threat to challenge either. I was just something it didn't want to deal with. As the summer wore on, my reputation grew. The bear made sporadic appearances, but always after midnight, always silent and always careful. The kids loved the idea that someone in camp had stood their ground. It gave them a sense of safety, maybe, or just something wild to tell their parents. Either way, discipline got easier. Campers didn't talk back to me. If they did, another kid usually stepped in. I heard one whisper, "Don't mess with her. She faced the bear." That got a laugh out of me, but again, I didn't deny it. Summer ended without another direct encounter. The bear never got into our trash. No one got hurt. The woods stayed quiet, and the nights returned to being just nights. Looking back, it could have gone differently. If I'd run, maybe it would have chased. If I'd yelled, maybe it would have stood its ground. But what happened was this. I froze, shone a light in its face, and waited. And for whatever reason, that was enough. To this day, I still think about that night. The way the air felt, the silence, the weight of those eyes on mine, and the slow, heavy way it turned and disappeared into the woods. There's nothing mystical about it. No ghost stories, no ancient forest magic. Just instinct, timing, a wild animal and a human crossing paths and choosing not to test each other. But even now, years later, I remember that feeling. The absolute stillness, the knowledge that I was out there, alone, and that the rules of city life didn't matter in the dark woods. I learned something about myself that night, that sometimes staying still That night, the woods were calm and quiet, just like any other camping trip I had been on before. The old campsite was nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by tall pines that swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering soft, rustling sounds. My friend and I had arrived earlier that day, carrying our gear through the narrow dirt trail that twisted through thick brush and tangled roots. It was a place his family had been coming to for years, an old spot that somehow still felt untouched by time. We set up our tents close to the small lake that mirrored the dark sky above. The water was still and clear, reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. Around us, a few other families had gathered, pitching tents here and there, cooking meals over small fires, and sharing quiet conversations. The air smelled fresh, the rich scent of damp earth and pine needles mixed with the faint, smoky tang of campfires. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the campsite came alive with the familiar sounds of summer camping. Kids splashed in the lake, laughing and shouting. The older folks relaxed in folding chairs, their faces lit by the fire's warm glow. My friend and I spent the afternoon fishing along the rocky shore, skipping stones across the water and talking about everything and nothing. Later, we went for a swim, the cold water shocking at first but refreshing as we floated under the bright blue sky. That evening, after dinner, we gathered around a small bonfire. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground and into the trees beyond. The fire crackled and popped as we roasted marshmallows, sandwiching gooey sweetness between graham crackers and chocolate. The scent of burning wood mixed with the sugary smell of the s'mores, and the quiet hum of cicadas filled the night air. It was the kind of perfect, simple moment that feels like it could last forever. After the fire died down and everyone retreated to their tents, the woods grew still again. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon, filtered through the leaves above. My friend and I had decided to stay up a little longer, sitting by the dying embers and enjoying the cool night air. That's when I first heard it, a sharp, clear whistle cutting through the silence. It was the Hunger Games whistle, a haunting three-note call that immediately caught my attention. Without thinking, I whistled back. Whistling had always been one of those little skills I picked up when I was young. I could carry a tune, mimic bird calls, and even make some melodies just for fun. I thought it would be funny to play along with whoever was out there. The whistle came again, and I responded once more. For several minutes, this back and forth went on. The whistle call, my answer. Then there's again, each round growing a little more playful, until the melody started to shift and change. It wasn't just the Hunger Games call anymore. It turned into a series of random notes and counter melodies, almost like a secret song between us. I glanced around, realizing the campsite was mostly silent. Everyone else was asleep in their tents. It was just me, my friend, and the mysterious whistler somewhere out there in the woods. At some point, I stopped caring about the safety or logic of it. No flashlight, no shoes, no backup. I stood up and started walking into the forest, barefoot, feeling the cool dirt and fallen leaves under my feet. My friend tried to stop me, said it wasn't a good idea, but I was too curious. I had to find out who was making those whistles. I moved quietly through the trees, the night thick around me. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets, frogs, and distant owls. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced with every step. My eyes adjusted slowly, catching glimpses of moss-covered logs, twisted roots, and the occasional glint of a spider's web. I focused on following the whistle, at first clear, then fading into the rustle of wind and leaves. 20 minutes passed like that. My heart was pounding, both from the chill in the air and the growing sense of unease. My friend called out a few times behind me, saying we should turn back, but I kept moving forward, convinced that the whistling was leading me somewhere important. Finally, we reached a small clearing. It opened up just enough to reveal a steep cliff dropping down to the lake's edge. The water below was black and still, reflecting the pale moonlight like glass. Nearby, several old trees had fallen over the edge, their trunks stretching halfway into the water. The place was beautiful but strange, like it didn't quite belong, a secret corner of the forest no one ever talked about. Sitting in the clearing were 3 kids. They didn't look like they were camping. Their clothes were simple and worn, almost like they belonged to a different time or place. They sat side by side, staring out across the lake, completely still. When I called out to them, trying to say I'd been following the whistles and wanted to know who they were, they didn't even turn their heads. They didn't move or answer. It was unsettling. They seemed completely unaware of me, like I was invisible. I stayed a few feet away, not wanting to scare them or get too close. Their faces were pale in the moonlight, and their eyes blank, fixed on the dark water below. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, until my friend gently pulled me back. We didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We just turned and walked back toward camp. When we returned, the whistles had stopped. The forest was silent again, as if the whole thing had never happened. The other campers didn't hear a thing. In the morning, I asked around, but no one else had noticed any strange noises or whistling during the night. Everyone was either a deep sleeper or just unaware. The whole experience left me unsettled for days afterward. I thought about those kids in the clearing, who they were, why they didn't respond, why no one else could hear the whistles. It didn't feel like a dream or a trick of the mind. It felt real, like something just outside normal understanding, but not supernatural or made up. Something about the place and the silence was deeply wrong. Still, I went back the next year. I wanted answers, or maybe just to see if the feeling would return. The campsite was the same in many ways. The trees, the lake, the soft earth underfoot. But the whistling never came again. No strange kids in the clearing, no eerie silence. Just the calm, quiet woods and the occasional call of a night bird. I never figured out exactly what happened that night, but I learned one thing for sure. The woods keep their secrets close, and some sounds are meant to be left unanswered. I was 17 when I had to do my solo night out in the woods. It was part of the counselor in training program at this summer camp I'd been going to for years. Everyone who wanted to be a counselor had to do it at the end of their training. Spend one full night alone, away from everyone, without a tent, without a phone, and without any sort of real gear other than the bare essentials. It was meant to test your nerves and help you connect with nature, or at least that's what they told us. I was nervous, but also looking forward to it. It sounded like a rite of passage, and I felt like I was finally going to prove I could handle being out there by myself. I had borrowed a hammock from a buddy of mine who had done the solo night the year before. He said it made the whole experience a little easier than sleeping straight on the ground. He had given me a couple of pointers too, like choosing trees that weren't too close together but not too far either, always checking for ants and other bugs on the bark, and trying to set up before it got too dark so you weren't fumbling around at dusk with rope and mosquito nets. The spot I was assigned was about 3 kilometers from the main camp, not exactly the deep wilderness, but far enough that you couldn't hear or see anything from the camp. It was near a small creek with a patch of old-growth forest, big trees, thick underbrush, and barely any flat ground. I picked a place near a bend in the creek where there was a flat enough area with 2 solid trees the right distance apart for the hammock. I could hear the sound of water moving slowly over rocks, and it gave the whole spot a peaceful background noise. The forest around me was thick but not completely overgrown. You could walk through it if you didn't mind the occasional branch to the face or some thorny underbrush. It was still warm out in the early evening. I spent some time clearing the ground underneath the hammock just in case I fell out in the night. I used a stick to poke around the underbrush to make sure there were no holes or nests. I remember seeing a few squirrels darting around in the trees and a woodpecker hammering away somewhere nearby. Everything felt alive but calm. There was no wind, no storm clouds, and no signs of anything out of the ordinary. I didn't have much with me, just a water bottle, a granola bar, a sleeping bag liner, and a small sheet of paper with instructions in case of emergency. I wasn't allowed to bring a flashlight or a watch or even a phone. The idea was to strip everything down and rely on your instincts and your senses. I remember the sun starting to dip behind the trees and casting long shadows across the forest floor. I sat on the ground for a while, eating the granola bar and listening to the crickets slowly start to chirp as dusk set in. When it got dark enough that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face, I crawled into the hammock and pulled the sleeping bag liner up to my chest. I lay there swinging gently between the trees, staring up at the little bits of sky I could see through the branches. First, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept hearing every little rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig. At one point, I thought I heard something big moving in the distance, but it never came closer. I told myself it was probably just a deer or maybe even a raccoon. That forest had plenty of both. Eventually, the sound of the creek and the bugs started to blend together, and my body relaxed. I think I drifted off sometime not long after midnight. I don't know for sure, since I had no way to tell the time, but it felt like I had been asleep for a while when I suddenly woke up. I didn't shoot awake or sit up or anything dramatic like that. It was more like I just opened my eyes in the dark because something felt wrong. I couldn't see anything, of course. It was pitch black. No moon. No stars visible through the canopy. Nothing. But I could hear something. It was close. I couldn't tell exactly what the sound was, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't the creek or the bugs or wind through the trees. It was quiet, almost like breathing or rustling, right below me. I held my breath and tried not to move. I remember how still the hammock felt, not even swaying. Whatever it was so close that if I had leaned over the side, I could have touched it. My whole body tensed up. I could feel my heart beating so hard I thought it would give me away. My ears strained to figure out what I was hearing. It was like a low huffing noise, followed by a soft scrape. Then nothing. Silence. Then a few slow steps crunching leaves. Then nothing again. I didn't move. I just lay there in the dark, frozen. I tried to think. I had no flashlight, no knife, no tools. I was wearing a t-shirt, some thin pants and socks. No shoes. I had taken those off and left them under the hammock. My water bottle was hanging off a branch nearby. The emergency instructions said not to panic and to stay put unless there was immediate danger. But the way my body felt in that moment, everything in me was screaming to get up and run. But I stayed still. The noises started again. More deliberate this time. Something walking slowly, maybe circling the hammock. I felt like I was being studied, like whatever it was didn't know what I was, or maybe it did, and it was just figuring out what to do about me. I didn't smell anything weird, didn't hear any growling or panting, just the slow, irregular steps and the occasional soft sound that could have been sniffing or scratching. Then everything stopped. I lay there in total silence, my ears straining for the tiniest sound, my muscles aching from how still I was. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Felt like hours. My thoughts raced through every animal it could be. Bear, coyote, mountain lion. But nothing had made a move. No attack, no growl, no sudden lunge or sniffing right up close. Just those few vague sounds and then stillness. And then it happened. This ear-splitting, shrill shriek tore through the silence from right next to the hammock. It was so loud and so sudden that I felt like my body jumped a foot in the air even though I didn't move. Came from maybe 3 feet away, no more than that. It echoed through the forest and then faded into silence again. My heart felt like it stopped and exploded at the same time. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe for a second. I had no idea what the hell had made that noise. It didn't sound like a person or a dog, or anything I could immediately place. It was sharp and high-pitched, but not in a way that sounded weak. It had power behind it, like something announcing itself. After that sound, there was nothing. Not a leaf rustling, not a footstep, not even the sound of the creek. Everything went dead quiet. Even the bugs had stopped. That silence was maybe the worst part of the whole night. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, just like I was. I lay there until the first gray light started creeping through the trees. Took forever. Every few minutes I'd think, okay, it must be almost dawn by now, but it wasn't. My body was stiff from not moving, and my back hurt from how I was twisted in the hammock. But I didn't want to shift or roll over or do anything to make a noise. When the first bird started to sing, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Bit by bit, the normal sounds of the forest returned. The rustling leaves, the distant sound of water, the bugs buzzing in the underbrush. The light grew stronger, and I could finally see the shape of the trees around me again. I sat up in the hammock and looked down at the forest floor. There was nothing there. I scanned the ground under me and saw my shoes, undisturbed, my water bottle still hanging from the branch. I looked around and didn't see any tracks or disturbed leaves or signs that anything had been there at all. Then I heard it again, but this time it wasn't right next to me. It came from a bit deeper in the woods, a little farther off. That same shriek. This time, with the light of morning and the pressure of the night lifted a little, I recognized it. A wild turkey. It was a wild damn turkey. All that fear, all the stillness, all the gut-twisting terror I'd felt for what must have been hours. It was a turkey. I sat there in the hammock for a long time, not sure whether to laugh or be angry or just cry a little. My nerves were completely shot. I had never been that scared in my life, not even close. And all along, it had been some bird that had probably just wandered too close and gotten spooked by me. Still, even after realizing what it was, I didn't feel completely okay. The feeling I'd had in the middle of the night, the way the forest had gone quiet, the way something had moved around me slowly and deliberately, that didn't feel like just a bird. Maybe it was, and I was just imagining more than was really there, my brain turning shadows into monsters. But I don't know. Even now, years later, I can still remember that moment of absolute silence and the heavy feeling in my chest, like something was watching me. When I hiked back to camp that morning, my legs were still shaky. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. When I did finally mention it, one of the older counselors laughed and said turkeys can be terrifying if you hear them in the dark and don't know what they are. Said they've had a few kids freak out about them over the years. But still, no one else I talked to had one come right up next to their hammock and scream in their face. Since then, I've done a lot more camping, some of it even in deeper, more remote places. I've slept through storms and heard coyotes howling at night and had raccoons rummage through my stuff. I've gotten used to the sounds of the woods, but nothing has ever come close to that night. Nothing has made me freeze like that, heart pounding, every sense wide open. The second day of our 80-kilometer hike through Killarney Provincial Park was supposed to be just another long, hard day on the trail. My wife, our dog, and I had been trekking steadily deeper into the northern Ontario wilderness, surrounded by vast stretches of pristine lakes and dense, silent forests. The kind of place that feels both beautiful and unforgiving all at once. The day's hike had been tiring but rewarding. Each step carried us farther from the noise of civilization and closer to the raw, wild heart of the park. By evening, we reached a narrow point of land that stretched about 750 meters into one of the larger lakes. We set up camp there. The point was remote, with only one narrow trail leading onto it and the same trail for leaving. It was quiet, peaceful, and seemed perfect for a night under the stars. The lake lapped gently at the rocky shore, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a loon from somewhere far across the water. As the sun slipped below the horizon, we gathered firewood and got a small fire going. Our dog, an anxious but loyal creature, was restless but tired, and we made sure he had plenty of water and food to settle him before nightfall. We ate a quick dinner and then got into the tent around 10 p.m., exhausted from the day's hike but satisfied to be in our little shelter. We zipped the tent door closed, but as I lay on my sleeping pad, I began to hear the distant howling. It started around 9 p.m., soft, eerie wolf howls echoing through the forest. At first, it felt like just a natural part of the wilderness night, a haunting reminder of the wildness around us. But the howling didn't stop or fade. Instead, it grew closer and louder until it felt like the wolves were creeping right up to our campsite. We'd been camping in bear country before and had learned to handle wildlife encounters calmly. But the wolves were different. Their voices were unsettling, wild, raw, and full of purpose. Around 10:30 p.m., the howls were so close it was like the wolves were right on the edge of the trail leading down to the point. Then suddenly, one of them howled right behind us. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The noise wasn't coming from far away. It was close enough to be terrifying. It was right on the trail just a few feet behind the tent. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the cold night air. I shouted and banged on my cooking pot, making as much noise as I could to scare off whatever was lurking there. This was a tactic that worked well when we'd encountered bears before. Bears usually ran off from loud human noise, but this time I didn't see or hear anything in response. The forest was dark and still except for the occasional rustling of leaves. The wolf's howl hadn't come again immediately, so I thought maybe it had moved on. I went back inside the tent, trying to act confident. My wife was quietly shaking beside me, and our dog was unusually still, almost frozen with fear. I didn't want to show weakness or panic because I could tell it was affecting her. But just as I settled back down, I heard something again, soft, deliberate footsteps outside the tent. The dog remained silent, but his whole body was trembling. I slowly unzipped the tent door and shone my flashlight into the trees. There, about 15 feet away, stood a wolf, staring straight at me with sharp, unblinking eyes. It was a large, lean animal with thick fur mottled in grays and browns. The air seemed to freeze. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for the bear spray, gripping it tightly and raising it in case I needed to defend myself or my dog. The wolf didn't move. It just stood there, calmly watching. I shouted at it, loud and harsh, trying to scare it away. I took a few quick steps forward, trying to look big and strong, like I'd done with bears before. But the wolf didn't care. It didn't flinch or run. After a few tense seconds, it casually turned and walked slowly into the tree line, disappearing into the shadows where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. I built a fire between the tent and the edge of the trees, hoping the light and heat would keep the wolves away. I kept my headlamp on for hours, scanning the darkness every few minutes. The howling continued throughout the night, with wolves calling to each other every 20 minutes or so. It wasn't just one or two animals. It sounded like a small pack was circling us. One wolf's howl seemed to come from as close as 50 yards away. I was terrified they would come closer, maybe even try to grab our dog. At about 6 a.m., the howling changed. It grew louder and more intense, like a full chorus of wolves answering each other. 8 to 10 of them, howling together, their voices bouncing off the trees and across the lake. It was overwhelming. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting next to the fire, exhausted and tense. When the sun finally rose, we packed our gear quickly and started the hike out. We were 36 kilometers into the trail, 2 days in, and though we had planned to hike out slowly, the night's experience had drained all our energy and patience. We wanted out fast. The hike out was grueling but without incident for the first hour. Then, about 1.5 hours in, the howling began again. The wolves were behind us, following us on the trail. I could hear their distant calls echoing through the forest, growing louder at times. They weren't attacking or chasing, just keeping pace, letting us know they were there. The feeling was deeply unsettling. A little later on the trail, we spotted a bear with 2 cubs. Normally, that sight would have been concerning, but after the night we had, it was almost a relief. We kept our distance and hurried on, thinking only about getting back to civilization. My wife's feet were raw from the long hike. She lost all her toenails, the skin torn and blistered from constant wetness and rubbing in her hiking boots. Our dog was still jittery, clearly suffering from anxiety after the night in the tent. Even now, days later, he jumps at the slightest noise. We finally made it back to the trailhead in just over 6 hours. a huge contrast to the slow, careful pace we'd taken on the way in. The wilderness had reminded us in the clearest possible way that no matter how prepared you are never in control out there. The wolves didn't need to attack to scare us to our bones. Their presence alone was enough to change the entire experience from adventure to nightmare. That trip left a mark on all of us. My wife's feet needed weeks to heal, and our dog took months to stop flinching at every shadow. I kept thinking about how close that wolf had come, how calm it was in the face of my shouting. It wasn't scared, it wasn't aggressive, it just wanted to be there on that point where we had camped. I realized then how thin the line is between us and the wild. One night, one moment, and you realize you're a visitor in a world that operates by rules you'll never fully understand. We survived, yes, but that night changed something. It reminded me that even in the most peaceful places, nature holds its own power and mystery, indifferent to our plans or comfort. The wilderness demands respect, not just for its beauty but for its danger, always lurking just out of sight. And sometimes, that danger comes not in the form of a chase or an attack, but in the silent, watching eyes of a wolf standing quietly in the dark, knowing you are there and waiting for you to leave. Last summer, I took a solo road trip across the United States. It had been something I'd wanted to do for a while. Just me, my little hatchback, a mess of gear in the trunk, and the open road. No set plan, no deadlines, just a list of parks and places I wanted to hit and enough time to get lost in between. For most of the trip, I slept in my tent. I had a couple of nights in motels when I needed a shower or just wanted a real bed. But for the most part, I was living cheap and sleeping under the stars. It was supposed to be about freedom, challenge, and space to clear my head. I'd left Crater Lake later than I meant to that day. I'd hiked a bit, then stayed back taking photos and eating lunch at a quiet turnout where I had a view of the lake. The sky had been perfectly clear, and I hadn't wanted to leave, but by the time I was back on the road, it was already late afternoon. My plan had been to get into California and find somewhere quiet to sleep along the way, ideally before dark. I wasn't trying to get anywhere specific that night, just find a decent enough spot to pitch my tent, maybe cook something simple and crash. The problem started when I noticed my gas light had come on. I didn't think much of it at first. I was used to driving remote roads and usually had a decent sense of how far I could go once the light came on. But mile after mile passed, and I hadn't seen a gas station or any kind of services. Not even a closed one, not even an abandoned one. Just road and trees and dry, dusty clearings. The needle on my gas gauge was so far below the E that I felt like the car was running on faith. Eventually, I saw a small wooden sign off the side of the road that just said, "Campground," with an arrow pointing down a dirt road that curved off into the trees. It wasn't anything official like a state park. It didn't have the big brown National Forest signs or anything like that. It looked more like an old homemade sign, barely hanging on a nailed post. But I was getting nervous. I didn't know how much farther I could make it. I figured even if I just stopped to talk to someone camping there, I could get some information. Maybe somebody had a gas can or could point me toward the next station. Worst case, I'd just sleep there. I turned off the main road and started bumping my way down the dirt path. The road was rough, clearly not maintained, and I had to go slow to keep from knocking something loose under my car. The ground was dry and uneven, the path twisting between tall trees that felt like they'd swallow you whole if you drove too far in. I kept telling myself it was fine. People camped in places like this all the time. It was probably just a local spot, one of those campgrounds made on old land that used to be something else. After a few minutes of driving deeper in, I came to the first campsite. There was a clearing with a fire ring and a beat-up wooden table, and a small tent already set up. A couple in their mid to late 20s was sitting near a small fire. They saw me pull in, and I got out of the car to stretch and say hello. They looked pretty normal. The guy had a bit of a scruffy beard and was wearing cut-off shorts and a faded black t-shirt. The woman was thin and tan and had her hair pulled back in a loose bun. I asked if they knew the area and if there were any gas stations nearby. They said the nearest one was only about 2 miles away, but it had already closed for the night. I was relieved to hear that it wasn't far. If I left early the next morning, I could make it there easy. They said the campsite next to theirs was open and I could use it. I figured I might as well. It was already getting dim, and I didn't want to risk running out of gas trying to find something else. I thanked them and pulled into the next clearing, maybe 30 yards from theirs. The ground was dry and hard. I was having a hell of a time getting my tent stakes into the ground, so I started looking for a rock or something to hammer them in with. That's when the guy from the other site came over with a hand axe in one hand. He offered to help. The gesture felt off. Maybe it was just the fact that he was holding an axe and I was by myself, in the middle of nowhere, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness that settled in my gut. Still, I nodded and let him help hold a stake while I hammered it. I figured if he'd meant to do anything sketchy, he had the chance already and hadn't taken it. Once I got the tent mostly set up, I reached into my cooler and pulled out a beer. As a neighborly gesture, I offered him one too. He took it and stood around for a minute sipping it, making small talk. His partner wandered over shortly after. She looked at me and asked if I had any pills. That hit me sideways. Not like, "Do you have Advil?" She said it in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck go up. I just told her I had ibuprofen and offered her some. Then I thought maybe I'd smooth things over and told her I had some weed I'd picked up in Washington, if they wanted any. They both got pretty enthusiastic about that and asked if I wanted to smoke with them later. I said maybe. They reminded me more than once that I needed to pay for the campsite at the self-serve box. I hadn't seen any box, but nodded. Then they said I could just write my credit card info on the form and drop it in the box. That was the moment I really felt the first deep, serious red flag. I told them I didn't have any cash on me and they just kind of shrugged, but the woman repeated again that I should still fill out the form. I didn't like that. Something about how persistent they were didn't sit right. She said she wanted to introduce me to some of the neighbors. I was wary, but I didn't want to be rude, and I thought it might give me a better idea of the kind of people I was dealing with, so I followed her. We walked a little ways down the dirt path to an old RV that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Cardboard was taped over the wheels. There was a pile of scrap wood stacked up behind it, and the outside was caked in grime and dust. I didn't want to go in, but she was already climbing the steps and waving for me to follow. Inside, it smelled like stale beer and grease. There was an older man in his 60s sitting at the little dinette, red-faced and clearly drunk. An older woman was at the tiny stove, cooking something in a greasy pan. A scruffy dog lay in the corner, half asleep but watching me carefully. The old woman insisted I try one of the tacos she was making, and before I could politely refuse, she was handing me a paper plate. The drunk man launched into a long story that didn't seem to go anywhere. He was slurring badly, and I only caught pieces of it, but the punchline ended up being something about cannibalism and Jeffrey Dahmer, right as I was holding the taco. I felt my whole body tense up. I said I had to go check on something and slipped out of the RV. The dog followed me, sniffing at my pants pocket. I tossed the taco to it and walked back to my campsite, trying to look calm, but my brain was racing. I cracked open another beer and sat in the car with the door open. I was trying to make sense of the situation. These people were off. That much was clear. But were they dangerous? Or just weird and poor and high? The guy from the first couple wandered over again and we talked a bit. He said they'd been camping there for 2 weeks because they ran out of money. He said it like it was no big deal, like living out there indefinitely was normal. I tried to act casual, just listening, sipping my beer. Then I heard shouting. The older woman was yelling at the drunk guy. Her voice cut through the trees, sharp and furious. I couldn't make out everything, but it was the kind of yelling that comes after years of resentment. Something about being fed up, about him ruining things again. Then it quieted down. I kept pretending to sip my beer, trying not to show how tense I was. The woman from the younger couple came over and said something about heading into town and needing a ride. She offered to ride with me to the gas station so I didn't get lost. My stomach turned. There was no way in hell I was letting her in my car. I made some excuse about needing to do something at my site and walked back to my tent. As soon as I got there, I ripped up the stakes as fast as I could. I didn't even bother folding anything properly. I just pulled the tent, tarp, and fly up in one big tangled mess and shoved them into the back of the car. I didn't care if I crushed stuff. I didn't care if I forgot something. I needed to go. I started the engine and eased the car back out the bumpy dirt path, headlights off until I was a good distance away. I kept watching the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone running after me or headlights following. But the road behind me stayed dark and empty. The gas station was closed, just like they said, but not far back I'd passed a small B/B. I figured I'd try my luck and pulled into their little gravel lot. The place looked decent. Well-lit, neat porch, some flower boxes, and the woman at the desk looked surprised to see me. I told her I wasn't looking for a room, just needed somewhere safe to park and sleep in my car. I explained vaguely that I'd had a weird situation at a campground. She offered me the bathroom and said I could help myself to the coffee in the morning. I thanked her and backed into a spot by the edge of the lot. That night, I barely slept. I kept locking and unlocking the doors, adjusting how I was laying across the back seats, and watching the driveway for headlights that never came. I replayed everything over and over. That taco, the credit card form, the way they'd watched me set up my tent, the weirdness in how they acted like they lived there, the way they wanted to know how far I planned to drive, the timing of the old woman's yelling, the ride offer. In the morning, I used the bathroom, thanked the woman at the desk again, and grabbed a cup of coffee. The gas station opened at 8, and I was there 5 minutes. The summer I took part in the Duke of Edinburgh Award was supposed to be one of those formative, memorable experiences. One of those things I could look back on with pride. We were set up at Sandy Balls, a fancy campsite in the New Forest. Fancy was definitely the word for it. It was a place where you could almost feel the tension between the clean, polished feel of the site management and the rough, grubby group of 16-year-olds the program had sent there. We were the paupers camping down at the bottom of the hill, while the posher guests got tents or cabins with proper bathrooms and even little patios. Our campsite was right at the edge of the site, at the bottom of a slope, past the last few pitches, where the land gave way to open fields and cow pastures. It was basically a dead end. No paths continuing beyond except for rough dirt tracks leading into farmland. That location meant we got a little privacy but also felt pretty isolated. The day had been long but fun. We'd broken a couple of the Duke's rules to sneak up to the main area, where they had a small bar and a screen set up to watch the World Cup. I remember Croatia beating someone famous 3-1. Player named Jarni scored. It felt like a small act of rebellion at the time, but looking back, it was the last moment of carefree distraction before things started to get weird. When we finally stumbled back to the tents, it was already dark. We split into 2 groups. 3 of us had the luxury tent, which was actually just a slightly bigger and newer tent we'd somehow gotten, and the other 3 crammed into the old, worn school-issue tent that was more functional than comfortable. I was in the second group, and it felt colder than I expected, even though we were late summer. We zipped up the tent and tried to settle in for the night, but soon enough, an unsettling noise started creeping into the silence. First, it was faint, a single bell tinkling, the sound of a bicycle bell, then the distinct sound of wheels crunching on gravel or dirt. But it wasn't close, and it didn't move away. It came from down the path from the direction of the fields. We all listened, lying in our sleeping bags, straining to hear over the night sounds. The rustling leaves, distant calls of animals, the low hum of insects. It came again, the bell ringing sharply, the soft, steady thrum of a bike tire rolling on the path. Then silence. No footsteps, no voices, no other sound. After a while, we realized it was happening several times, regular, predictable almost. The sound of a single cyclist coming down the narrow dirt path, ringing a bell, then stopping. No sound of a bike riding back, no footsteps, no movement in the opposite direction. Just the noise from down the path and then nothing. We didn't say anything about it at first. The others joked quietly that it was probably a night cyclist passing by, even though it didn't make sense. We were at a dead end, and the site staff had told us explicitly there was no public access beyond the farm fields. No one rode bikes there at night. The place was supposed to be quiet, and the path beyond our tents was blocked by gates and cattle grids. Still, the bell tinkling, the rolling sound of a bike tire on gravel, repeated over and over through the night, came from the same direction every time. Sometimes it was faint, just a little jingle of the bell, barely audible through the trees. Other times it was louder, clearer, as if the cyclist was just a few dozen feet away. But no matter how close it sounded, the noise never moved closer or further away. It never came down the hill past our tents. It never went back the way it came. We lay awake listening to that sound. The strange rhythm, the eerie silence after it stopped. Our imaginations started filling in the gaps. None of us wanted to admit how uneasy it made us feel. When morning finally came, we were all tired and jumpy. We looked out from our tents, trying to find the source of the noise. The campsite was quiet. The path we'd heard the noise from stretched away into the farmland. Open fields with cows grazing lazily, a couple of old farm buildings in the distance. The gate at the end was closed and locked. There was nowhere for a cyclist to ride beyond that point. No bikes, no tracks in the dirt. No sign anyone had been there at all. That morning, the strange cycling noises hung over us like a shadow. We packed up our gear for the day's hike, feeling a little on edge but trying to shake off the weirdness. Our next waypoint was an abandoned fireplace site we'd heard about on the maps. It was supposed to be a landmark, a place to rest before moving on. The route took us through thick woods and open fields, muddy patches and narrow streams. The path was rough and overgrown in places, and we quickly realized the hiking would be tougher than we expected. We were already tired from the night's restless sleep when the ground turned slick with mud near a small stream. I slipped and nearly fell several times. At one point, the mud sucked at my boots like it wanted to swallow me whole, and it took all my strength to pull my foot free. The group was spread out by then. Some of us were ahead, scouting the way, others lagging behind. That's when a loud, angry moo shattered the quiet woods. We all froze. A cow appeared from behind a thicket, its dark eyes fixed on us, head low, muscles tense. It was one of the big black and white dairy cows, but it looked aggressive. It started walking toward us slowly but deliberately. We didn't want to upset it, but there was no way around. The cow was blocking the only path through the narrow clearing. We backed up slowly, trying not to make sudden moves. I kept my eyes on the cow while glancing around for a way to escape. The others started whispering to each other, which only seemed to annoy the cow more. It let out a deep, low bellow and pawed the ground. We started looking for an alternate path through the bushes. The ground was uneven and slippery, but we managed to circle around the cow and get out of its way. It followed us a little, mooing loudly, but eventually gave up and wandered off. That encounter left us all rattled. The forest suddenly felt less friendly. We pressed on toward the abandoned fireplace landmark. The fireplace was a crumbling brick circle, blackened with soot and cracked with age, surrounded by thick undergrowth. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The place gave off a strange vibe, silent, forgotten, a spot where no one came anymore. The air was damp, the trees closing in tightly, blocking the weak sunlight. We rested for a moment, catching our breath and checking the map. Our route continued on, crossing a shallow ford over a stream. The ford looked manageable at first, but as we stepped into the cold water, we realized the current was stronger than it looked. The rocks underfoot were slick and uneven. I lost my footing and almost fell into the water. Someone reached out and grabbed my arm, steadying me. We crossed slowly, one by one, careful to keep balance. The water was freezing, soaking our boots and socks. We pulled ourselves up on the far bank, shivering and muddy. Just as we thought the worst was over, the weather turned. Clouds rolled in quickly, and a light rain began falling. The path back to the road was muddy and slippery. Our legs were tired, muscles aching. We finally reached a clearing with a Canadian War Memorial, a stone monument dedicated to fallen soldiers, surrounded by neat flower beds and a small bench. The sight of something so carefully maintained, so solemn, felt surreal after the rough trek. We sat down to rest, waiting for our pickup. The silence here was heavy, and for a moment, none of us spoke. We stared at the memorial, thinking about the stories behind it and how far away we were from everything. When the van arrived, relief washed over us. We were cold, tired, and covered in mud, but safe. We climbed in without a word, glad to be heading back to civilization. Looking back on that night at Sandy Balls, I still think about the cyclist noises. How was it possible? The path was blocked, the farm gates locked, and there was no one else camping nearby. No one else was riding bikes late at night on a dead-end path leading nowhere. We never found an explanation, and I don't think we ever will. It wasn't ghosts or stories from folklore. It was something real, something we heard but couldn't see or explain. Maybe it was a trick of the wind or distant sounds carrying oddly through the trees. Maybe it was an animal we misheard. Or maybe it was someone cycling just beyond the locked gate, testing the boundaries of the campsite. Whatever it was, that strange, silent ringing bell and the echo of wheels on gravel was enough to remind me that even in the most familiar places, there are moments when reality feels just a little off. And sometimes those moments leave a mark you can't forget. The rest of the hike was tough. Mud, angry cows, cold streams, but normal, real and physical challenges. The kind you expect on a trek. But that night's Phantom Cyclist was different. It was quiet, patient, and impossible to explain. And it stayed with me long after the muddy boots and tired legs were washed clean. Sometimes, when I hear a bike bell ringing far away on a quiet street, I think about that night at Sandy Balls, about the dead-end path, the locked gates, and the cycling sounds that had nowhere to come from and nowhere to go. I remember the day I went on that 16-mile hike in Arizona like it was yesterday, even though it's been years now. It wasn't some epic backcountry trek I planned for months or a careful, well-prepared adventure. No, it was the kind of trip you take when you think you're ready for the mountains but don't really understand what you're up against. I was still getting back into hiking at the time, trying to get out and challenge myself after a long break from the outdoors. I thought I was set, packed my bag, grabbed some freeze-dried meals, and filled my water bottle. What I didn't realize was that the dry heat and high altitude of the Arizona desert would punish me for not bringing enough water. The trail started out easy enough. I remember the sun was bright, the sky a deep, clear blue, and the air was dry. The kind of dry that hits your throat and makes your skin crack even if you don't realize it right away. I was hiking with my dog. He was a big part of the trip. My loyal companion, always by my side, sniffing and exploring but staying close enough so I didn't worry. We climbed steadily, making our way up what I thought was a modest hill, topping out around 8,000 feet. The altitude wasn't too bad at first. I'd done some hiking before and figured I could handle it. The gain was nothing crazy, just enough to make me sweat but not to the point of exhaustion. But I didn't plan for the lack of water. By the time I reached the summit, the sun was already starting to dip behind the horizon. The sky shifted from blue to streaks of orange and pink, fading into purple. I could feel the temperature drop quickly in that dry mountain air, and the wind picked up just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be unpleasant. The view from the top was incredible. The valley below was vast, stretching out into the distance, and I could see the faint outline of more mountains beyond the horizon. But I wasn't really there to enjoy the view. I was there because I had to make a decision. I checked my water supply carefully. I had been drinking it steadily throughout the hike, but the desert heat had drained it faster than I expected. The freeze-dried meals took barely any space but didn't help with hydration at all. I had maybe a half-liter left, tops. I split what I had between me and my dog, making sure he got his share. His tongue lolled out, eyes bright and alert, and I could tell he was thirsty but still ready for whatever was next. We settled down near a large log that looked like a good spot for a quick camp. I wasn't planning to stay the night, but I knew I couldn't risk wandering around in the dark, especially in an area I had never been before. I set up a small hobo fire, just enough to keep some warmth and light, and tried to relax, telling myself it was just a temporary stop before heading back first thing in the morning. The night came fast and deep. Once the sun disappeared, the darkness swallowed everything whole. No moon was out that night, so it felt like we were buried under a thick, black blanket. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the occasional distant call of a bird settling down. My dog lay close by, ears twitching now and then, always alert. The temperature dropped more than I expected. the dry cold settling deep into my bones despite the fire. Then, around 10 p.m., that's when it started. First, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound was too deliberate. Something rustling through the brush, moving closer and closer. It wasn't a breeze carrying dry leaves. It was heavy, low shuffles, with an odd grunting noise that made my stomach knot tight. My heart jumped, the kind of fear that sneaks up quietly at first and then builds, pressing down hard on your chest. I wasn't sure what it was. It was too big to be a coyote, too noisy to be a small animal. Mountain lions are usually silent hunters, so it didn't fit their profile either. I had my Morniv strapped to my belt. It's a good knife, sharp and reliable, but in that moment it felt like nothing. I'm no Daniel Boone, no wilderness expert. Just me and my dog, miles from civilization. The reality hit me hard. I was alone with whatever was out there, and all I had was a small knife and a campfire that barely kept the darkness at bay. The sounds grew louder and closer. I could hear the creature moving in the underbrush, shuffling branches and snapping twigs. My dog's body stiffened, ears pricked straight up, eyes locked on the direction of the noise. He stayed still for what felt like an eternity, watching, waiting. Then suddenly, when the creature was maybe 10 or 15 feet away, too close for comfort, the dog sprang up and started barking like his life depended on it. The barking echoed through the night, fierce and sharp. What happened next surprised me so much I nearly laughed through the tension. The creature let out a strange, high-pitched squeal, like a startled pig or some weird animal I couldn't immediately identify. It sounded ridiculous after all the fear I'd been feeling. And just as quickly as it came close, it bolted back into the brush and disappeared into the darkness. It was a javelina, a wild pig common in the southwest deserts, but at the time, it felt like a monster ready to tear me apart. The relief washed over me in waves. I felt silly and foolish, but also grateful. My dog had saved me without even knowing it. His instinct had kicked in just in time to warn me, and the javelina had no interest in confrontation once it realized we were ready to defend ourselves. After that night, I didn't take the outdoors lightly anymore. I learned the hard way how important it was to carry enough water, especially in dry, high-altitude places like Arizona. I started planning my hikes more carefully, paying attention to weather, terrain, and how much water and food I'd need. The freeze-dried meals were convenient, but hydration was the real priority. I couldn't afford to be careless like that again. My dog, too, grew older after that trip. Now he's 13 years old, no longer able to hike those long trails, but still sharp as ever. He guards the house against the vacuum cleaner like it's some kind of beast, and I sometimes think about that night up on the hill, how he stood watch in the dark, alert and ready. It's funny how a small, unexpected moment like that can stay with you forever. Looking back, I realize how close I was to a real disaster. I didn't have enough water, I wasn't prepared for the night, and I was miles away from help in unfamiliar country. But the lesson stuck. Respect the mountains, respect the desert, and never underestimate how quickly things can change when you're out there alone. That night was scary as hell, but it was also a turning point. It made me a better hiker and a more cautious person. And even though I lost a bit of my man card to a silly javelina, I gained something much more important: wisdom, respect for nature, and a bond with my dog that's lasted through every step since. I used to run a Cub Scout pack years back. I did it for a while, 7, maybe 8 years. It was something I kind of fell into. My son had joined, and the group needed volunteers, and one thing led to another. Before I knew it, I was spending my weekends organizing hikes, pitching tents, teaching 10-year-olds how to cook sausages without setting fire to the grass, and pretending I was more comfortable with first aid than I really was. I liked it, mostly. It gave me purpose, something useful to do. And the boys, well, most of them were good kids. One weekend in late spring, our pack had booked a spot at a Scout Association site about an hour and a half outside southeast London. The place was mostly woodland, surrounded by patches of cleared grass for tents and activities, bordered on the north by a railway line, and to the south by farm fields and a small stream. A couple of brick structures served as toilets and wash-up points. It was a decent site, Safe, clean, plenty of space, far enough from towns to feel like a real camping experience, but still close enough that help wasn't too far off if anything went wrong. There were 3 of us leading the trip, myself and 2 others. Pete, a quiet bloke in his early 40s, and Mark, younger, still in uni, training to be a teacher. We had 24 boys with us that weekend, all around 9 or 10 years old. They were split into 6 tents, for per tent, arranged in 2 neat rows on a flat stretch of grass near the woods. Our own tents were set just a few meters off to the side, close enough to be within reach if anything went wrong, but far enough to give them a sense of independence. The day had gone well. We'd done some orienteering in the morning, built shelters from branches and tarps in the afternoon, cooked dinner over campfires. I remember watching the boys fumbling with their skewers, laughing too hard at burnt sausages, dropping half their food into the fire pit. I'd done this dozens of times before, but I always enjoyed the routine of it, the predictable rhythm of the weekend. The same squabbles over marshmallows, the same noise at bedtime that slowly faded into snores. By around 10:30 that night, everything was quiet. We'd walked a lap around the tents, checked that the boys were zipped up and warm enough, no torches left on, no sweets stashed under pillows. The 3 of us sat for a while by the dying fire, talked a bit, and then turned in around 11. I was asleep fast. I remember being warm in my sleeping bag, exhausted, hearing the faint hum of the wind moving through the trees above us. That kind of sleep that hits you after a full day outside. No dreams, no tossing or turning. Then I woke up to screaming. It was about 2 a.m. The sound ripped me out of sleep like someone had grabbed me by the collar and yanked me upright. I didn't have to think. I unzipped my tent, nearly fell out of it barefoot, heart pounding, legs moving before my brain caught up. It was a human scream, that much was clear. Not some animal, not the wind, not imagination. A proper, terrified scream, full of panic, loud and raw and urgent. Someone was shouting for their Mummy! Again and again, desperate, then nothing. Just silence. That awful, hollow silence that hits after something terrible. I ran straight for the tents. 6 domes in a neat row, all zipped up. The scream had sounded like it came from somewhere in the middle. I was expecting to find a tent torn open, maybe an animal inside. Fox, a dog, God knows what else. We didn't have wild predators in our part of England, but the way that kid screamed, Jesus, I thought maybe one had wandered in from somewhere. Or someone. Pete and Mark were right behind me, eyes wide, faces pale in the half-light. We didn't say anything. We just checked tent after tent, unzipping doors, poking our heads inside. But nothing was wrong. Every boy was accounted for. All 6 tents, 4 kids each. All sleeping. That's the part one still can't explain. I went tent to tent. I remember ducking inside, looking at the 4 shapes lined up on their sleeping mats. I saw slow-breathing, calm faces. I even knelt down to check one boy's pulse, just to make sure he was alive. He was just asleep. We checked all of them, one by one. Same thing every time, nothing. No one awake, no one crying, no one showing signs they'd even stirred. It was like the scream had passed over them without touching them at all. We stood there for a few minutes, waiting, listening. Not a sound. No footsteps in the woods. No rustling in the trees. No animal calls. Just complete stillness. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Felt wrong. The way a room feels after someone has just left in a hurry. Eventually, we went back to our tents. I didn't sleep much. I lay there, eyes open, straining to hear any sign of trouble. My heart took nearly an hour to slow down. I think I must have dozed off sometime after 4. In the morning, the boys were up bright and early, same as always. Laughing, chatting, elbowing each other. Not a single one of them mentioned the scream. Not one of them looked shaken. When I asked casually how they'd slept, the answers were all the same. Fine, good. Slept like a log. We did a head count. Still 24 boys. Still the same tents. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. We looked around the site, checked the perimeter, walked along the edge of the woods. No broken branches.
No footprints. No rabbits.
Nothing that said anyone had come or gone. We talked about it, the three of us, over tea at the wash-up area. Mark thought maybe it was a night terror. A boy screamed in his sleep and then passed out again so fast he didn't remember it. But I've heard night terrors before. I've had to deal with them on past trips. They're disturbing, but this wasn't that. It wasn't one of those sharp, startled yelps either, like when a kid wakes up confused. This was full-on screaming, loud enough to wake me from a dead sleep 30 feet away. Loud enough that I expected to find blood on the grass, a ripped tent, a missing child. But there was nothing at all. After that morning, we carried on with the weekend. Hiking, campfire songs, skits, the usual stuff. The boys had a good time. No one said a word about that night. I kept a close eye on them all the way through Sunday, watching for signs that one of them was holding something back. But there was nothing odd. No behavior changes.
No tensión.
Just normal, cheerful boys. We packed up on Sunday afternoon, did a final check of the site, and drove back to London. The kids got picked up by their parents one by one. I stood there in the car park, shaking hands, telling them how well their sons had done. I looked into their faces, trying to guess which one had screamed, if any of them had. But again, nothing. Back home, I didn't mention it to my wife. I told myself it wasn't worth worrying her over. And over time, I convinced myself it must have been a dream, or a weird coincidence, maybe a sound from somewhere else. A drunk shouting on a distant road. Maybe it bounced off the trees and carried. But even now, I know that's not true. It wasn't an echo, and it wasn't imagination. It was a child, a terrified child, screaming for his mom, in a place where there should have been no danger. And the thing that haunts me most is the silence that followed. If a kid screams like that, he doesn't just fall asleep again instantly. He cries. He asks for help. He needs comfort. But there was none of that. Just a scream and then total quiet. We never figured it out. I thought about asking the boys during later meetings, but I didn't want to plant ideas in their heads. I didn't want to cause fear where there wasn't any. Still, every time we camped after that, I found myself checking the tents more often, lying awake longer, just in case. Eventually, I stopped running the pack. Life got busy, my own son grew out of it, and I passed the torch to someone else. That was years ago, but I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I wake up suddenly in the dark, and everything is quiet, too quiet. When I lie there and try to remember if I heard something, a voice, maybe in the distance. Even now, I don't have an answer, and I don't think I ever will.